Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the MMA Pick'ems podcast, where we'll be breaking down UFC 270, Ngannou versus Gane. And, we've had a number of fights fall off already, most notably the Topuria Evloev fight. But, the backup fight is still going to be pretty exciting, just maybe not as hype as the original. But the rest of the card still looks pretty solid. Just unfortunate we lost so many fights already. I think the two title fights are probably going to be pretty good. There are a lot of prospects on this card as well. A lot of guys making their debut. And, if there's anything we learned from this previous card, it's that you definitely have to be a little wary of these guys making their debut. These guys who, they look great on the regionals. They look great on Dana White's Contender Series, but kind of just fall flat a little bit in their UFC debut. It's a big step up in competition. They're facing someone who's going to be able to push them like they haven't been before. So you do have to be a little wary with these spots. And I don't want to get too far ahead of myself right now. So I'm just going to recap the previous card real quick. It shouldn't take too long. The card only had like 10 fights, didn't have too much action, and overall wasn't super eventful or anything. So let's dive right into it. Kicking off the previous card, we had TJ Brown, Charles Rosa. Didn't really touch this fight. Rosa stepping in short notice against TJ Brown, who'd had a full camp. On top of that, Rosa has historically really struggled on bottom. The guy's a little weak. He's got good submission defense, but outside of that, he hasn't really shown much lately. Brown was able to kind of just grind him out. Not much else there. Brian Kelleher, Kevin Kroom, another short notice fight. And Kelleher just showing there are levels to this. He was giving up some size, quite a bit of size actually. And, Kevin Kroom, not a terrible fighter by any means, but, he is very seasoned on the regional scene. But Kelleher just out-veteraned him, landed the heavier shots, went to the wrestling. And, seems to be the theme of the card yesterday was just, vet lessons all around. But speaking of Court McGee, Ramiz Brahimaj, the first fight I did have a little action on. I put a bet on Ramiz and also took the fight to go the distance. Obviously had a pretty bad read in terms of, I kind of overrated Ramiz, I guess, and underrated Court. I thought that it'd be somewhat competitive, at least on the feet. And then we could potentially see Ramiz, work the grappling a little bit. But, obviously Court was able to really just get it going early, put the pace and pressure on Ramiz, went to the wrestling, and was able to just win a pretty dominant 30-27 decision. Brahimaj looks like he's still pretty much sub or bust. He hasn't really shown much improvement at all throughout his 3 UFC fights, and the guy definitely looks like, his cardio's not there at all, because after that first round, he pretty much had nothing for McGee. But moving along, Jamie Pickett, Joseph Holmes, another guy making his UFC debut, came in as a favorite, and, definitely did not live up to the expectation there. That said, though, I don't think anyone was super high on him, but again, just kind of serves as like a cautionary tale of being a little wary of these guys making their UFC debut, taking that big step up in competition. And I do feel a tad vindicated because last week I just kept repeating, or at least the last podcast, I kept repeating, how some of these guys are making their debut. They could be a bit untrustworthy. You can't completely trust the tape. And it felt like a little bit of a cop-out, especially since I said that for like 4 or 5 fights. But, sometimes it is what it is, and that's just how it is sometimes. But moving along, Joe Anderson, Brito, Bill Algeo, once again, the more UFC-proven fighter, was able to get the W. Brito, he looked strong in that first round, but the cardio, the pace, and the pressure of Algeo was able to take over. And, Brito just wasn't able to keep up. But moving along, Dakota Bush, Vyacheslav Borshev, and, of course, the one prospect that was able to deliver was the Russian prospect. Who would have known? But, Borshev, he did look pretty slick out there. Got the early finish. Not much else to say about that. So we move along. Caitlin Chukagian, Jennifer Maia. I did take a 1-unit shot on Maia, thinking, that last fight, what really won her one of the rounds was the wrestling, the grappling. Just took a shot on, potential fight IQ, game adjustments that she could have made. But of course, that didn't happen, which is why, I didn't go too heavy on it at the end of the day. Also took fight, goes to decision. Figured, be a somewhat back and forth fight. Maybe we'd see a little bit of grappling from Maia. That didn't happen, but really, I think it just shows that Chukagian's just on another level from Maia in terms of, technique and just game planning and fight IQ. So We move on from that. Brandon Royval, Rogerio Bontorin ended up taking the under for this fight, and also Royval by submission. And it definitely looked like Bontorin might have tapped there. Definitely was a Brazilian tap, but kind of rough. Really would have liked that to have cashed, the under and then the submission prop as well. But whatever, we move along. Jake Collier, Chase Sherman, kind of a shit pick here, was on the Sherman side. Figured the size advantage would be a bit of a factor. Thought it'd play out a little more on the feet. But, it was a really weird exchange. Somehow got the fight to the ground, and Collier was able to snap up the submission. But even before that, Sherman didn't look like he was quite confident in there. Really wasn't letting his hands go anyways. So probably it for Sherman. Only one win in the UFC, and it was over a light heavyweight, essentially, who's super chinny. So I don't think he's got a future at the UFC. But moving into the main event, really good fight, actually. Ended up parlaying, I think, the over 1.5. Just played it super safe. I figured that, the first round it'd be a bit of a feeling out process. And then once, they got each other's timing down a little bit, it would kind of pick up. And then we start seeing guys sit down on their shots. And I felt that after that first round is when things would really start to pick up, when things would get a little dangerous for both guys. But it looked like Chikadze just came in there guns blazing early. He was sitting down on a lot of his shots early. He was throwing big shots at Kattar. I don't know if that was a great game plan, because it looked like he tired himself out early in the fight. Not to mention, all those spinning attacks, the flashy attacks, lost balance, and Kattar was able to get on top of him and really drain the cardio in that first round. And after that first round, it was pretty much over for Chikadze. I think he had a pretty terrible game plan going in, guns blazing early instead of looking to pace himself, because we did see that in the early striking exchanges, Chikadze was getting the better of Kattar, but he was going a little too balls to the wall. Did not pace himself well at all in that fight. I think that if Chikadze had, taken it a bit slower, really, looked to stay on the outside, work the leg kicks, look to mix in his boxing a little bit as well, instead of just looking to take Kattar's head off early, he probably could have paced himself well for, 2 or 3 rounds and potentially have won a decision. But, a little questionable in terms of the game planning there, especially knowing Chikadze is someone who doesn't exactly have the best cardio. A little questionable there, but, really happy for Kattar, honestly, was able to get that solid bounce back win. I mean, he essentially Max Holloway Chikadze there, and, crazy to see these guys make improvements after getting their ass beat by Holloway. And, maybe there's a little trickle down improvement here, and we see Chikadze style in his next opponent, but that wraps up the card there. Had some pretty shit picks, honestly, and not the best betting night, but hopefully we can bounce back here. And this is a pretty great card to do it. It's a numbered card, and, just got to pick some better spots. But without further ado, let's get right into this card. Hansen versus Jasmine, Jasudavicius, and Hansen's going to be the minus 250 favorite. Come back on Jasudavicius is plus 200. And we have a pretty interesting matchup here. Hansen, for some reasons, moving up to 125. Not really sure why, but she'll be giving up a ton of size and reach to Jasudavicius, who is a pretty well-rounded fighter, I think. She does stay pretty tall, pretty rangy on the outside. She's a little plotty, though, but, it looks like she's got a decent clinch game, pretty strong elbows and knees there. Jasudavicius has shown she could mix in a bit of the wrestling as well. Overall, she does seem pretty well-rounded. The cardio seems to check out. But, she hasn't exactly fought really any good fighters. And overall, she is still a bit green despite, showing a somewhat well-rounded game. And on top of that, I feel that Jasudavicius is a little slow on the feet, a little hittable, and just kind of plotty. So, little concern there. But, luckily for her, she's going up against Hansen, who is kind of slow herself, honestly. Her striking's not particularly great, and it doesn't look like Hansen's really comfortable there. But I do feel that Hansen, where she really shines is going to be in the grappling. She's got some nice trip takedowns, some nice throws, and then on the ground, she's very slick there and very crafty. And generally, she is pretty reliable to get the fight to the ground. So I do think there is a potential path to victory here for Hansen. But, I do think there are a lot of variables in this fight. And, Hansen being like minus 250, I think is, I don't know if it's completely warranted, mainly because, for one, she's moving up to 125. She's going to be giving up a ton of reach, a ton of size. And on top of that, we haven't really seen Jasudavicius on her back. We haven't really seen the takedown defense of Jasudavicius as well. So, if Hansen isn't able to get this fight to the ground, it could be a pretty close fight on the feet. I would actually favor the striking of Jasudavicius a little bit more, just purely based off of like the size and the reach. And then, Jasudavicius could potentially hit some takedowns as well, but I'm not sure how good Jasudavicius' top game really is. We could potentially see Hansen, just hit a reversal or a sweep and, get on top of Jasudavicius. So, I do think this is a somewhat tough fight to call because we have a lot of incomplete information regarding Jasudavicius. But, taking a look at this matchup, on paper, I do feel that Jasudavicius is going to be the value side, but there's a really weird feeling, and I got a sneaking suspicion here that Jasudavicius might not have the best balance or takedown defense, and we see Hansen just be able to take Jasudavicius down, lay on top of her, potentially get a submission, but I can definitely see Hansen just pull off a very grindy, just dominant sort of control-based decision as well. And it's really just a lot of speculation here, but when it comes to some of these tall, lanky, plotty sort of fighters, their balance might not be the best. And if that's the case, I could see Hansen winning pretty clearly in the grappling. So official pick is going to be Hansen, but I really can't hate on anyone taking a shot on Jasudavicius here. Plus 200 is, I think, decent value, especially since Hansen's win equity is largely tied with, how well she does in the grappling. And if Jasudavicius' defensive grappling does check out, she could, I think, win this fight somewhat handily. So the official pick, though, I'm still going to go with Hansen. I'm just going to go on that hunch. But I might take a small shot on Jasudavicius or maybe Jasudavicius by decision. And that'll take us to the next fight, Genaro Valdéz versus Matt Frevola. And Frevola is the minus 225 favorite. Comeback on Valdéz is plus 190. And we'll start with the underdog and the UFC debutant in Valdéz. So Valdéz does appear to primarily be a grappler. Seems to have a pretty strong submission game, although I don't know if he's exactly just a super high-level submission guy. It looks like from a lot of the tape that I've seen that he's kind of just muscling guys in there. He's able to kind of just bully guys and just really just muscle his way to a submission. But, on top, he is very aggressive and very heavy on top. And generally does like to move forward and just swings pretty wild on the feet. I don't think his striking is particularly great. He's usually just looking to use it to close the distance, get his hands on his opponents, and get the fight to the ground. His cardio is still a bit of a question mark. He's got a ton of early finishes, but he is someone who does push a pretty crazy pace. So it's going to be hard to see how he looks as the fight progresses. But, he's going to be going up against Matt Frevola, who I don't think's got the best cardio either. I mean, overall, I actually think Frevola is a pretty unreliable fighter. He's prone to drop the ball here and there. His chin is a little suspect, and he's again got pretty suspect cardio as well. I don't think it's bad or anything, but for someone who is got that wrestling base, I just don't think he's got enough cardio to wrestle aggressively for 3 rounds. I think Frevola's honestly got about like 7 or 8 minutes of wrestling cardio before he starts to slow down significantly. But overall, I do think Frevola is a decent fighter, though. He's got a solid skill set. His boxing is okay. It's nothing special, but, it does get the job done in between, when he's looking to wrestle. It's just that his chin is a little shaky. So, during that time, things could get a little dicey. But overall, I don't think that Valdéz is a particularly high-level striker. And it doesn't look like he's got a ton of power in his hands or anything, but he could potentially still clip Frevola. Frevola is coming off of a pretty quick KO, and his chin's never been that great. So every knockout that comes afterwards is probably going to diminish his chin even further. So who knows where his chin's at the moment. But looking at this matchup, I do think that Frevola should win this. He's the much more proven UFC fighter. He does have a solid skill set. He can look to hit takedowns, get control time, and then his striking is serviceable enough to hold him over until he gets his wrestling going. The thing is, though, I just would not recommend laying minus 200 on Frevola. He's just way too unreliable of a fighter. And, Valdéz definitely looks like someone who will bring it. And, Valdéz for sure will push a pace. And, if that happens, we just don't know if, or how Frevola is going to look later in the fight as well, too. I mean, we haven't really seen Valdéz later in fights, but, with the pace he pushes, he could definitely make fights a lot closer than it is, especially as the fight gets extended later in the second and third rounds. But overall, I do think Frevola should take it. I think he's got a path in the wrestling, and I do think his striking is a bit better than Valdéz's. Valdéz, he can potentially find the submission early, but, like I was saying before, he kind of just is able to bully his opponents and kind of muscle his way into a submission. I'm not too sure if he's going to be able to do that against Frevola here. I think Frevola should be able to kind of match him in the athleticism, and I don't think Frevola's defensive grappling is bad or anything. So I do think he should be able to fend off the submission attempts of Valdéz early. The real question mark is how both guys are going to look when it gets extended. Especially with the pace Valdéz pushes. But ultimately, I'm going to go with Frevola here. I'm going to go with the more proven fighter. But no way I'm going to lay the minus 200 on it. It's pretty ridiculous for someone like Frevola, who's shown to be pretty unreliable. Moving along, Vanessa Demopoulos versus Silvana Gómez Juárez. I already did the breakdown on this. My opinion hasn't really changed, so I'm just going to boot up the old breakdown. However, I do want to say I will not be rebetting this fight at minus 145 for Demopoulos. Initially I'd gotten her at plus 100, and of course the bookies canceled the bet now that the odds have shifted in their favor. Fucking scumbags. Anyways, minus 145 is not the play on Demopoulos. So with that in mind, I'm just going to load up the old breakdown here. And moving along, we have Vanessa Demopoulos versus Silvana Gómez Juárez, and Juárez is the minus 120 favorite. Demopoulos is the plus 100 underdog. So we'll start with the slight underdog in Demopoulos first. She is primarily a grappler. I believe her base is in jiu-jitsu. Her striking isn't particularly great. She's a little plotty and a little hittable on the feet. That said, though, she is very tough. She's got a lot of heart. She will continue to move forward and throw regardless. However, for someone who I would consider a grappler, she doesn't seem to really have the most urgency in getting the fight to the ground. She does seem pretty content to just stand and strike with a lot of her opponents. And something that I also didn't really like was that she does look like she is someone who will play off her back a bit if you can take her down. So, not very encouraging there. But she's going up against Juárez, who, I don't really rate highly either. Gómez Juárez is a striker, and she does look like she's got a bit of power, but based off of the very limited footage I've seen, it doesn't look like she's fighting really any good opponents whatsoever. And honestly, her striking looks kind of basic as well. Like, I just think she's got a super padded record. I mean, if you're just watching some of the fights she's been in, they're honestly kind of sad. Some of her opponents don't even look like they belong in there with her. And the fact that she's got this many knockouts on her record, I think is actually a bit of a red flag, because either she's got just phenomenal power or she's just out there beating a bunch of bums. And I'm leaning towards the latter. So this is a very easy Vanessa Demopoulos pick for me. I think on the feet, it's probably going to be pretty competitive. Demopoulos' striking really isn't all that good, and she is super hittable. So, I think it's pretty 50-50 on the feet. I do think Demopoulos has got a bit of upside if she decides to look to grapple a little bit. But overall, I'm going to side with Demopoulos here. And, just going to do a little bit of MMA math here. Both of these fighters have fought Lupita Godinez. Godinez was pretty much able to just run through Gómez, took her down early, and then was able to find the armbar late in the first round. Whereas Demopoulos went 5 rounds with Godinez in what was a pretty back and forth fight. She did fight somewhat competitively there. It was a little while ago, but all things considered, she gave a much better account of herself than Gómez Juárez. So yeah, the pick for me is Demopoulos here. Might even better as well. But probably wouldn't go too heavy on her just because, Demopoulos, she's actually kind of small for the division. And on top of that, she isn't the most reliable to go to her grappling, which is going to be the biggest path to victory for her. Because if this is a stand-up affair, this could be very 50-50, and we could actually see Gómez Juárez, pull off a victory here if it just is 100% a stand-up affair. But ultimately, this is a little bit of a fade on Gómez Juárez as well. She's 37 years old, making her second fight in the UFC. Hasn't really beaten anyone but bums. So I think the upside is going to be with Demopoulos. So I'm going to pick Demopoulos. I think she can get the submission, but I also think she could win a decision victory as well. And moving along, we have Michael Morales versus Trevin Giles. Pretty interesting fight here. Morales making his UFC debut after a pretty impressive Dana White's Contender Series fight. Showed some other wrinkles to his game. Prior to his Dana White's Contender Series performance, he was more or less just running through his opponents on the regional scene. Lots of red flags in terms of, the guy hadn't really been past the first round, primarily just a ton of knockouts early as well. So, him being able to take that step up and show other aspects to his game in his Dana White's Contender Series fight was, very impressive to me. Because, in that fight, he was going up against a pretty solid, regional vet in Vretnikov. And, that first round was kind of close. You can argue that Vretnikov won. I'd say Vretnikov won that round, but Morales was able to make the adjustment, go to the grappling, and win the other two rounds. So that I felt like was a real solid veteran move, actually, for someone as young as he was, for someone who hadn't really been extended in fights. So I thought that was really impressive. That said, though, he's going to be going up against Giles, which is another step up in competition for him, right? Because how I felt about the Vretnikov fight was that was a step up in competition for Morales, and he was able to deliver that fight. But this is another decent step up in competition for Morales once again, because with Giles, he is a pretty solid UFC tested fighter. I'm not super high on him personally, but he has shown some good boxing. Shown he could wrestle as well. He's fought some other UFC vets in there. Overall, I'd say Giles is pretty unreliable. He's super inconsistent in there. When he's on, his boxing looks super sharp, but he's also had a ton of duds in there as well. I think his cardio is a little suspect. I think his fight IQ is, not that great as well. But, I do have to admit, overall, Giles is the more experienced fighter. He's going to be the better boxer in there, possibly the better wrestler. But, one thing you want to keep in mind for this fight is that Giles is actually going to be moving down a weight class. So, it's going to be interesting to see how the cut goes for Giles. The cardio has always been a little suspect. So moving down to 170, it could be a bit of a concern there. And then on top of that, Giles is coming off of a pretty nasty knockout. It's only been about 6 or 7 months, which, it's not the longest amount of time for recovery. But also, you have to wonder how the weight cut's going to affect his durability as well. That said, though, taking a look at this matchup, I do think that there are a lot of things on paper that kind of point to Giles maybe taking this, the more experienced fighter, the better boxer in there. And, he could wrestle a little bit as well. So, those are all paths and all reasons to like Giles here. But I think I'm actually on the other side in Morales. I know I might be buying into the hype a little bit, but I was really impressed with his Dana White's Contender Series win. But overall, I just think there's a lot of variables when it comes to Giles going into this fight. Obviously the weight cut, and the fact that I think when Giles has had the best performances in terms of his boxing, it's because he was just the much quicker, crisper guy in there. Moving down to 170, I don't know if the speed is going to translate as well. On top of that, again, the weight cut, you just don't know how that's going to affect him. The cardio might not be on point, or it might be even worse than it was. And, again, the durability. But also, I do think that Morales, while he is a little wild, a little unpolished on the feet, I do think he's probably the superior athlete. He's probably going to have the quicker hands in there, albeit, a little unpolished, a little raw. I do think he might also be the heavier hitter as well. Morales has shown a very crisp jab, a nice 1-2. And, he has shown a phenomenal amount of heart and grit as well for someone who has gotten a ton of early finishes. He did show that he can gut it out in a 3-round decision and lean on his wrestling a little bit, which I do think is going to be a bit of a factor here. We know that Giles will slow down, and if Morales is able to work in the wrestling and really get Giles working in there, we could potentially see Giles just, drop the second and third rounds because, he's a little fatigued in there. And on top of that, there are some other intangibles, I guess, that I would give to Morales. In terms of, I think, the hunger and the commitment, I'd say Morales kind of edges it out. Morales is out here. He's talking about being the first Ecuadorian fighter. So, the guy takes a lot of pride in that. And he wants to perform, really put his country on the map. Whereas with Giles, he's still working part-time as a cop, which, I can't hate on him for that. It's very commendable. He's serving his community, but it does show that maybe the commitment to the UFC isn't fully there. And I just don't know how much longer you could continue to juggle that and have like a successful UFC career. So a little intangible fact that I think might have a bit of a factor, especially when the going gets tough in a fight, rounds 2 and 3, when you really need that extra bit of motivation to push it through. I think Morales is going to be the one to come through with it. So I'm going to pick Morales here to win a decision. I think he's got the tools to do it. But I don't know about laying juice on a guy making his UFC debut, regardless of, how good he's looked on the regionals or, how impressed I was with his last performance. It's just, I just don't think it's, super profitable long-term to be betting these guys making their debuts. So I'm going to go with Morales here. But, I honestly can't hate anyone taking the Giles side. You're getting a proven UFC fighter at dog odds. But ultimately, I'm not super high on Giles, and I don't think he's reliable enough for me to want to bet him here, especially at like plus 120, which, you're not getting like a ton of value, I don't think. So the pick for me is going to be Morales. I have him winning via decision. And in the next fight, we have Saimon Oliveira versus Tony Gravely, and Gravely's the minus 250 favorite come back on. Oliveira is plus 210, and we'll start with the underdog in Oliveira first, who does appear to be a pretty grappling-heavy fighter. He's quite aggressive in there. He's generally just looking to attack submissions. He's got a very strong front choke game. That said, though, it is against pretty low-level opponents. He's able to kind of just snatch up their neck, sometimes just jump guillotine, and just submit them that way. So, lower-level guys in there, probably not the best submission defense. And generally, I don't know if you want to be jumping guillotine against, fighters in the UFC, especially someone like Gravely, who's a pretty strong wrestler, someone who's got a pretty decent top game. So a little concerning there for Oliveira, but it does look like he can potentially snatch up a submission, but, he will give up some pretty bad positions potentially. And from what I have seen, it does look like he can potentially struggle on bottom and get stuck there. It kind of showed that in the Farias fight a little while ago. However, I do think that Oliveira is pretty tenacious in there. He is someone who is a bit of a dog, and he will bring it throughout the whole fight. But he is going up against Gravely, who is a pretty good fighter, overall. Like I said before, he is a pretty strong wrestler, but, he's got some good boxing too. Definitely seems to have some power. His chin does seem a little shaky, but overall, Gravely's pretty consistent with his wrestling. You can rely on him to hit, 3, 4, 5 takedowns in a fight. And, I think his cardio is okay too. I think it's better than what a lot of people make it out to be. He does slow down, but he does push a pretty crazy grappling pace. You see his opponents slow down as well in a lot of these fights. So while I don't think that Gravely's got top tier cardio or anything, he is someone who has good enough cardio to, I think, push a pretty decent wrestling pace for 3 rounds. But taking a look at this matchup, I definitely do have to lean Gravely here. For one, the guy's, I think, a little more experienced. He's got, for sure, the more UFC experience. But even if we're just looking at the regional experience, I do have to favor Gravely a little bit more. Oliveira, I don't think has fought the best guys on the regional level, whereas, Gravely, at least he's fought guys that are at, UFC caliber, even on the regional scene. And it does look like, the type of fighter that Gravely really struggles against are really like smothering high-level jiu-jitsu practitioners or guys who could, push a faster pace than him, like Dvalishvili. So I do favor the level of competition Gravely has. I do favor the wrestling that Gravely brings to the table, and I do think that Gravely is a superior boxer as well. So I do think that Gravely's got Oliveira covered in a lot of areas, But, Oliveira is someone who, he's pretty aggressive in there as well. And, he is pretty aggressive with the submissions. And one thing that Gravely has historically struggled with are submissions. So maybe if Oliveira is, relentless with the sub attempts, he could potentially catch Gravely in something because, Gravely can get a little careless in there. And second of all, Gravely has shown that his chin is a little suspect. And while I don't think Oliveira is a super high-level striker or anything, he could potentially, do a bit of damage. But I do think that overall, Gravely should take this. But I don't think I'd really advise laying the minus 250 on him. While Gravely's a strong wrestler, he's not a very strong, positional or control grappler. He kind of wins fights on the basis of just being able to spam takedowns, and do enough with his boxing to win these decisions. But I do think that outside of catching Gravely in a submission, I think Oliveira's got a pretty tough fight ahead of him. So the pick for me is going to be Gravely, and I do think he wins a decision here. Moving along, we have Jack Della Maddalena versus Pete Rodriguez, and Maddalena is the minus 300 favorite. Come back on Pete Rodriguez is plus 250. And honestly, not too much to say here. This does feel like a bit of a squash match. We have Maddalena, who is going to have a full camp here. His initial opponent, Warley Alves, had pulled out, so Pete Rodriguez is going to be stepping in short notice. But with Maddalena, the guy's boxing does look on point. He moves well, defends well, does seem very composed in there. Looks like he's got good counter punching, good shot selection. And, his cardio does seem okay. And, he does seem kind of quick despite being just super ripped in there. And something interesting to note with Maddalena, the guy's got a lot of finishes. But, up until those finishes, he's not exactly blowing his opponents out of the water. So I do believe Maddalena is someone who's able to build as the fight goes, make reads and, look for tendencies with his opponents. And combined with the fact, maybe some of his opponents start to slow down a bit, he's able to find these openings and get the knockout. So Maddalena, I think, is a solid boxer. That said, though, he hasn't exactly fought the highest level of competition, but, he's fighting some decent fighters, it seems. His opponent, Rodriguez, primarily a boxer as well, seems to have pretty quick hands. Looks like he's, hits pretty hard also. But again, he's fought really, really low level of opponents, far lower level of opponents than Maddalena. Overall, Rodriguez has about 3 minutes or 4 minutes of pro cage time. And in a lot of these fights, he's able to hurt and rock the guys with the first shots he's able to land. So I am overall a bit skeptical of the tape on Rodriguez's side. Can't deny that his hands do look kind of quick and he's got some power, but it's against some very, very low level opponents. So I think this is Maddalena's fight. I think he's the more hyped prospect, and for sure the UFC's probably looking to push him. I don't think they're going to look for a killer to step in short notice and take away that hype this early in his career. So I do feel this is a bit of a squash match. Honestly, I think that early in the fight, Rodriguez might be able to land on Maddalena. We might even see Maddalena get hurt, right? Because Rodriguez is coming in short notice, might come in, balls to the wall, very aggressive, look for the early finish. And, if that doesn't materialize, we might see Maddalena eventually find the finish as well. So I think, Rodriguez might have a very small chance early in the fight, but outside of that, I think Maddalena all day. So the pick is Maddalena. I got Maddalena winning either round 1 or round 2. So I think the under might be the look here, with how both guys fight in there. I don't think either guy's really a decisionator. Both guys are finishers. And, with how hard Rodriguez goes, we might see him just empty. We might see him empty the tank, in the first 2.5 minutes. And if he doesn't get Maddalena out of there, we see Maddalena just take over and either find the finish late in the first, potentially in the second. So the pick is Maddalena, and I'm just going to go with round 1 knockout. Moving along, we have Ilia Topuria versus Charles Jourdain. So, man, it's kind of unfortunate we lost the original fight, but this one should still be a banger just because Jourdain, he's someone who will always move forward, very exciting fighter, and same with Topuria, very exciting prospect, finisher for the most part. So should still be a banger of a fight. But we'll take a look at the odds real quick. Topuria is going to be the minus 550 favorite. Jourdain's coming in at plus 385. So I guess we'll start with Jourdain, who's coming in short notice here. So like I was saying before, Jourdain's a pretty high-paced fighter. He's very wild on the feet, likes to move forward and just throw volume. The guy's a little irresponsible defensively. He's quite hittable, and I think his grappling defense is a little bit of a concern. And the thing with Jourdain is, he is a pretty, I'd say, wild fighter in there. He likes to create a lot of chaos and just look to do damage, but it does leave a lot of openings for his opponents. And going into this fight, it's definitely going to be a concern here. But props to Jourdain, coming in short notice, putting his chin on the line once again against a very dangerous and hype prospect in Topuria. Because Topuria, he is, I'd say, a pretty dangerous submission grappler, but he has shown that he's got, pretty good hands on the feet. He's very aggressive on the feet. He likes to back his opponents down, unload on them. He's got pretty heavy hands as well. Two knockouts in the UFC already, and a number of knockouts on the regionals as well. But I think where Topuria really shines is going to be in the submission grappling. He's shown he's quite crafty there. Overall, just looks like a very solid prospect. Of course, the concern might be his cardio. I think outside of the Zalal fight, he's had just all first-round finishes. And he didn't even look particularly bad in the Zalal fight, considering it was a short notice fight. And, he did win a somewhat decisive decision there. Was able to just outwork outwork Zalal on the ground. Zalal not a terrible grappler himself. So I don't think the cardio of Topuria is terrible or anything, but I do think that in this fight, it's going to be he's going to be at a bit of a disadvantage. I think that Jourdain's got top tier cardio, actually. The guy just is nonstop in there. But taking a look at this matchup, I do think that this is a somewhat favorable matchup for Topuria. I think he should have the advantage in most areas of this fight. When it comes to the boxing, I do favor the power and the aggression of Topuria. Jourdain, he will move forward. Will probably look to meet Topuria in the middle, and they might just bang it out. But I do give Topuria a pretty significant edge on the ground, though. I think if he's able to get Jourdain down, he could have a bit of success holding him down, possibly even getting the submission. Jourdain hasn't shown the best takedown defense or even the best defensive grappling, but where I do give Jourdain the edge, like I said before, is going to be in the cardio. Jourdain's an absolute dog in there. He's going to move forward, and he's going to keep bringing the fight to Topuria. So Topuria is not going to want to slow down this fight. If he starts to tire a bit, we could see Jourdain start to take over. Topuria's definitely got to be careful, especially as the fight gets extended. But, with that said, though, Topuria has been training to go up against Evloev, who is a pretty high-paced wrestler himself. So, Topuria has probably been getting his reps in. He's, his conditioning should be on point this fight. So, I really think that if Topuria, goes to the wrestling, the grappling, he'll have a good amount of success. If he doesn't find the submission, I do think he should be able to control Jourdain long enough in this fight to win a decision here. And of course, the submission is live, but at the odds where it is now at minus 500 nearly, I don't know if I'd play that for Topuria, because while I do favor Topuria in a lot of spots in this fight, I just feel that Jourdain, he's gonna be a pretty dangerous fighter for all three rounds. He's gonna move forward, he's gonna throw, and if Topuria isn't able to get his wrestling or grappling going, we could see Jourdain make it a pretty close fight on the feet. Historically, I've never really bet Jourdain because he always comes in as a big favorite. And Jourdain's just such a high variance fighter, such a wild fighter that you can't really bet him as like a big favorite. But where he is now as, a big underdog, plus 400 on some books, it does make it a little interesting, right? Because he does have a proclivity to make fights close on the feet. But, if I'm Topuria, I'm probably looking to get this into the grappling, look to just kind of grind him out and limit some of the damage and the output that Jourdain's known to throw on the feet. Ultimately, though, I am going to go with Topuria. I think there's a very clear path to victory in the wrestling and the grappling. I think, honestly, the game plan for Topuria should probably just to really get the grappling going, either hunt the submission or get some control time. Don't really want to stand on and bang on the feet with Jourdain because things can get real hairy if that happens. So the pick is going to be Topuria, but I am very, very tempted on taking a small shot on Jourdain at these odds. And moving along, we have Raoni Barcelos versus Victor Henry, and Barcelos is the minus 450 favorite. Come back on Henry is plus 350, and looks like this fight's finally going to happen after a few rebookings. But I don't think my read on this fight has changed. In particular, I've looked into Barcelos or into Henry a little bit more, and I don't think anything has changed too much. We'll start with Henry, who, he doesn't look like a bad fighter at all. He does seem quite well-rounded. Is quite seasoned in terms of, just being a regional fighter. He's got good boxing and good wrestling. Just overall a very solid, well-rounded fighter. I guess the only concern I really have with him is probably going to be the defensive grappling. He has shown he could get stuck on his back a little bit, and the takedown defense not super high level or anything. So I guess that's really the big concern here. And going into this matchup, I do think that can be exploited by Barcelos, who is a pretty solid grappler himself. Not to mention Barcelos, I think, is probably the better striker as well. So I do think that Barcelos overall does have Henry covered in most areas. And, that kind of explains why, or at least justifies the big price tag on him. I don't think that Barcelos is necessarily going to blow Henry out of the water or anything, but I do feel that wherever the fight goes, Barcelos should just be the better fighter. So I think when that happens, the big price tag is kind of justified. I just don't see too many paths to victory here for Henry. I don't know if he's going to be able to outbox Barcelos. I don't know if he's going to be able to outwork Barcelos on the ground either. And, both guys are 34. So, the concern I had with Barcelos in a lot of his fights is, he's starting to get a little older, especially at bantamweight. 34 is getting a little up there in age. But Henry is the same age as well. And, you could argue that Henry's probably gotten more wear and tear on the regionals than someone like Barcelos. So I don't think the age is going to be a big factor here. And I definitely edge the level of competition for Barcelos. Very proven on the UFC scene. Whereas with Henry, he's still getting L's on the regionals. So yeah, a level of competition definitely on Barcelos' side. Barcelos, I don't think he's ranked, but I do feel he should be a ranked fighter, with the guys he's beaten. Whereas Henry's going to be effectively making his UFC debut. So I think Barcelos takes this. I think he could honestly win it however he wants. He could possibly get a submission. He could potentially just, outwork Henry on the feet, or even just grind Henry out to a pretty dominant decision here. So I'm going to go with Barcelos, official prediction, and I think he gets it done by decision. And in the next fight, we have Rodolfo Vieira versus Wellington Turman, and Vieira is the minus 265 favorite. Comeback on Turman is plus 225, and we'll start with Turman first. So to me, Turman is a very inconsistent fighter. Honestly, just someone I'm not really all that high on. His striking is pretty mediocre. He's billed as a grappler, but we've yet to see a solid grappling performance from him in the UFC, at least. He's also got a pretty suspect chin, and he has dropped the ball a few times in the UFC. The guy almost fumbled the win against Alvi as well. He did very clearly win that fight. If it wasn't for the point deductions, it wouldn't have been a close fight at all. But it was funny to see him almost choke that win away like he's prone to do. Overall, though, I really don't think Turman's that bad of a fighter. He's just yet to really put it all together. Just a very inconsistent fighter with potential chin issues. And he'll be going up against Vieira, who, is a little unreliable in his own right, for different reasons. The thing with Vieira is he is a bit of a gasser. He's a very high-level submission artist. But, if he's involved in a very high-paced fight, he could gas out. And, we did see that happen in the Hernandez fight, obviously. And then, he was slowing down a little bit in some of his other fights as well. And, with someone like him, who's as muscled as he is, you do expect him to slow down as the fight progresses. That said, though, he is very dangerous on the ground. He's very accredited in the jiu-jitsu realm. His striking is not particularly good. It's, a little basic, just, a lot of jabs, some leg kicks. But overall, his grappling is really where he stands out. We did see him do a little better against Stoltzfus. His cardio seemed to have checked out that fight. But, I do want to say that fight wasn't a particularly high-paced fight, and he basically was just jabbing the face off of Stoltzfus for about 2.5 rounds before eventually hitting a takedown and getting the submission. Overall, I do think that his fight against Hernandez was a little bit of an anomaly. It was him going a little too hard early and, going to the grappling a little too aggressively as well. And that led to him kind of burning out his arms, really draining the gas tank super early. I do think that if Vieira, paces himself, doesn't go to the grappling too aggressively early, he could definitely go to, or definitely win a decision. But, I'm still a little concerned about his cardio, especially if, we see a grappling heavy fight here. But taking a look at this matchup, I can honestly see it playing out pretty similarly to the Vieira-Stoltzfus fight where, it's primarily on the feet for a good chunk of the fight, just because, we might see, Vieira look to pace himself a little bit more. And then we might see Turman, maybe a little afraid to go to the ground with Vieira. He might respect his grappling a little too much. So we just end up seeing a fight play out on the feet, in which case I do think it's pretty close. I don't think the striking of Vieira is super high level. Same with Turman. So I do think that on the feet, it's probably going to play out rather closely. I do give Vieira a pretty significant edge in the jiu-jitsu, but that said, though, Turman, I believe, is a black belt himself. So while I do give Vieira the edge, I don't think that, it's an auto sub if it does hit the ground. So with all that being said, though, I really don't think that Vieira should be lined as this big of a favorite, because like I was saying, it's probably going to play out pretty closely on the feet. And if this does hit the ground, I do think that Vieira's got some submission upside, but I don't think it's a lock or anything that he's going to get the submission. But ultimately, I think I am still going to pick Vieira to win. I just really don't think he should be this big of a favorite. Really, the only reason I think he should be lined as a slight favorite is because he's got the submission upside. I don't think he's going to be blowing Turman out of the water on the feet. And, if on the other hand, Turman is able to hit some takedowns of his own, we could see Turman just get a bit of top control time. Or we could just see Turman look to wall install a bit against the cage like we've seen him do against to Alvi and to a certain extent Roberson as well. So the official pick for me is going to be Vieira, but I'm probably going to put like half a unit or a unit on Turman here. I just think the line is way too wide here. And, if Vieira doesn't find the submission in this fight, it's probably going to be a very close, greasy sort of decision. Honestly, I do think that if Turman looks to wrestle in this fight, it would really benefit him. Obviously, he does want to stay safe in the grappling, but I think it'd be a good strategy for Turman to really wear on the cardio of Vieira, really make him work, really push him. And I do think that Turman has got better cardio than Vieira. I don't think he's got fantastic cardio by any means, but I do think that if he's able to get in there and really make Vieira work, he can pull off the upset. So, official pick, I'm still going to go with Vieira here, but chances are I'll put about half a unit or a unit on Turman here. And in the next fight, we have Said Nurmagomedov versus Cody Stamann. And Said Nurmagomedov's the minus 200 favorite. Comeback on Stamann is plus 170. And we'll start with Nurmagomedov first. He's coming off of a year-long layoff. Honestly, a bit of a hype prospect, but I can see why. He is a pretty flashy striker, unlike some of his other Dagestani counterparts who are a bit more wrestling heavy. And on top of that, you are paying a bit of that Dagestani tax when it comes to these guys there. And on top of that, he is getting some pretty flashy finishes as well. So, it's not like it's completely unwarranted. But on the feet, he does like to throw a lot of spinning attacks. Overall, he's a pretty dynamic striker. Lots of movement there, lots of feints. Overall, just a pretty rangy striker. But, the reason I do say he's a little bit hyped is because, he's not exactly beaten the best guys there. He is running through them, but, you just look through, or you just look at some of the guys he's beaten. Mark Striegel, probably not a terrible opponent, but Striegel has just shown he's more of a regional fighter, and he was making his UFC debut, I believe, on short notice as well. And then before that, Ricardo Ramos, has been around in the UFC, but hasn't really broken through either. He's not a terrible fighter by any means, but not exactly, mid-level or anything. And Justin Scoggins' fight, he arguably lost it. A lot of people thought he lost that fight, but it was a pretty close fight regardless, and Scoggins is no longer with the UFC. That said, I don't want to discredit Nurmagomedov too much here. He did put up a pretty solid fight against Barcelos. Barcelos was able to win on the basis of just, getting a bit of control time and, keeping it close on the feet, but it did look like Nurmagomedov was giving Barcelos a few fits on the feet. So, overall, Nurmagomedov, pretty solid striker, does look like a decent prospect, but overall still a little unproven. And, he's going to be going up against Stamann, who is a pretty solid fighter in his own right, a bit of a gatekeeper, honestly. And the reason I say that is not out of disrespect or anything, but you just go through his record and look at some of the guys he's beaten and some of the guys he's lost to. I think it's kind of clear that, he kind of just floats around at that like top 15 sort of area, right? Like, he losses to Dvalishvili, Jimmy Rivera, Aljamain Sterling, a draw with Song Yadong. So, these are all guys who are, top 15, top 10 level fighters. And then you look at the guys he's beaten, Kelleher, Alejandro Perez, Brian Caraway, Tyrion Weir, guys who not exactly bad, but, they're not really top 15 at that point. So, Stamann is a very solid fighter, but I do think that we kind of know what level he's at this point in his career. But taking a look at what he brings to the table, he is a solid wrestler, and, he's got solid stand-up as well. But, overall, he just hasn't really broken through. And lately, it does look like he's not as aggressive with the wrestling. Granted, you look at the matchups he's been, or the fighters he's been matched up against. Dvalishvili, a very high-paced grappler himself, and it looked like Stamann just wasn't really able to keep up. And then Rivera, who is a really solid boxer and has got really solid takedown defense. So, obviously, Stamann's going to struggle a bit there. But, against someone like Kelleher, he was able to keep it standing. Didn't really need to go to his wrestling. And then the Song Yadong fight, I felt, was the last fight that Stamann really aggressively went to the wrestling, probably because Song, I think, was clearly the better striker there. So we saw Stamann look to get it to the wrestling to really mitigate that a bit. And I do feel that in this matchup, we're looking at Nurmagomedov, who's probably going to be the more dynamic striker on the feet, the one who's probably a little better. So there's a chance we see Stamann, go to the wrestling a little more aggressively in this matchup as well. And I do think that if Stamann were to win this fight, it'd likely be through the wrestling because, on the feet, I just see Nurmagomedov just being a little too dynamic there, just throwing the way more flashy strikes, probably landing a little bit harder too. So I do think that, Stamann's going to have to go to the wrestling to win this fight. And, we did see with Nurmagomedov that, he will struggle with the wrestling and the grappling a bit. We did see him struggle against Barcelos. Barcelos was able to take the back of Nurmagomedov, get a bit of control time in rounds 2 and 3, and I do believe that was what won Barcelos that fight. And while I don't think that Stamann is as good of a grappler as Barcelos, he is a good wrestler. I do think that Stamann could probably hit some takedowns. Maybe not get as much control time as Barcelos did, but, I think Stamann could probably hit, 1 or 2 takedowns in the first or second round or something like that. Look to close out rounds, with takedowns and, look to potentially steal rounds that way. But taking a look at the odds, it does feel a little off. We have a very proven fighter in Stamann. He's, I think, a very solid, like, top 15 fighter, or at least, borderline top 15 fighter. Whereas with Nurmagomedov, we don't really know what level he's at quite yet. He could very well be a top 15 fighter. He could come in here and beat Stamann here. But, I just don't know if you want to lay the minus 200 to find out. So I definitely do feel that Stamann is the value side here, especially since there is a clear path to victory with the wrestling of Stamann. So, for those reasons, I am going to pick Stamann here. I think he's the more proven UFC product. I think there's a path to victory for Stamann as well. For Nurmagomedov to win, he's going to have to keep it standing, keep it on the feet for, at least like 10 plus minutes and be able to do enough damage on the feet to either get Stamann out of there, which, Stamann's shown, phenomenal durability, or at least do enough damage to win on the cards. And maybe he can get it done. Maybe he is the real deal. But again, I just don't think the price is right here. So I'm going to go with Stamann. I think the value's on him. If you don't like the plus 170, you could probably just play Stamann by decision. Stamann's not really a finisher. He doesn't really have that much power in his hands. He's gotten 0 finishes in the UFC. Hasn't really finished that many fighters on the regional scenes either. So, if you're not really a finisher on the regionals, you're probably not going to be a finisher at the UFC level. And on top of that, Stamann's not really like a submission guy either. So I think if Stamann gets it done, it's likely going to be via decision. So you can probably just put a little bit on Stamann via decision if you like the Stamann side. But I might just honestly play the money line here, because by the time the decision prop comes out, we're probably going to see the line close up a bit, and we're probably not going to see too much value from or off of the plus 170 that we're getting right now. So I like Stamann here, and I like him to win via decision. And in the next fight, we have Michel Pereira versus Andre Fialho. And Pereira's the minus 280 favorite comeback on. Fialho is plus 240. And, Fialho is going to be stepping in short notice this fight. Pereira initially slated to go up against Salikov. Salikov pulls out. Fialho steps in. And this fight gets bumped to UFC 270. But, with Fialho, he does look like a pretty dangerous opponent, especially early. The guy's got very heavy hands. Just overall, very dangerous striker. Very high finish rate. I mean, he's on a 4-fight knockout streak, 2 of them being against ex-UFC fighters, in Vic and Sekulic. Granted, 2 guys, not exactly the most cast iron, but regardless, 2 UFC, ex-UFC fighters that he was able to knock out early. So, he's got a pretty solid, regional resume at least, and the guy has shown he's got some, knockout power, to say the least. But, the concern with him is going to be the cardio. The guy's extremely well muscled, and in all the fights that I have seen him get extended into the 3rd round, he's not looked good at all. One of those fights he was finished in, and the other one he was basically just hanging on to dear life. The guy just looks like death out there, honestly, after that 7.5 minute mark. And he'll be going up against Pereira, who, isn't exactly a cardio machine, but I do think that Pereira's got okay cardio. He came in, guns blazing in some of those fights, and, didn't do a good job pacing himself. But I do feel that the cardio overall might be a little better on Pereira's end. He did go 3 rounds with Price most recently, and, that wasn't like a slow-paced fight or anything. It was a pretty moderate paced with a bit of grappling as well. So overall, I do favor the cardio of Pereira, and of course, I do favor the UFC experience as well. And I mean, even the regional experience I do like from Pereira as well. He's had a pretty extensive regional career, but, on the feet, Pereira has got, pretty fluid movement in there, lots of, side-to-side movement. I think that he's probably going to be the more dynamic striker, whereas with Fialho, he's going to be the much heavier hitter. But, Pereira is a pretty big guy himself, and we have seen that from Pereira. He can mix in the wrestling as well. So Pereira, I think, is quite a bit more proven. He does appear to be the more well-rounded fighter as well. Not to mention, he's going to have had a full fight camp for this, whereas Fialho is going to be stepping in short notice. So a lot of concerns on Fialho's end. And, if the fight does get extended, you're going to have to, be concerned with the cardio a little bit. So I think this is a pretty easy pick for me. I got to go with the Pereira side here. Much more proven, full camp and everything. Fialho definitely does have a shot early. He's shown he's got a lot of power in his hands. So I do think that Fialho might be live to finish early. And, coming in short notice, we might see him, go all out in that first round, because he probably knows that he's not going to be going the full 3 rounds. So I think that Fialho, he might be, super aggressive early, and, he will be dangerous. So I don't really recommend laying the minus 300 with Pereira here. If anything, look to either live bet him. I guess maybe look to parlay him and then just hedge with Fialho round 1 knockout, because Pereira has shown that his chin might be a little dodgy. I don't know if he's chinny or anything, but, he has been knocked out on the regionals, by Todorovic of all people. But, outside of that, I don't know if he's really shown, chin issues, but, against a heavier hitter like Pereira or like Fialho, you got to be a little concerned. But overall, I do like Pereira here. Might honestly play Pereira round 3 because, with how hard Fialho slows down, we could potentially see Pereira start to lay it on him late. Maybe just mount him, ground and pound finish, similar to the Chris Curtis fight, right? So we saw Fialho lose to, I'd say, a UFC level fighter in Curtis, and we could potentially see the same thing play out in this fight, where Fialho's going up against another, solid UFC fighter in Pereira. So I'm going to go with Pereira here, official pick, and I think Pereira gets it done, round 3 knockout. And in the co-main event, we have the conclusion to the trilogy between Brandon Moreno and Deiveson Figueiredo. Honestly, I'm personally not a huge fan of these immediate trilogies. For one, it puts the fighters in a pretty weird spot. If Moreno wins, I think Figueiredo's probably out of the title picture for good. He's getting a little older, and I kind of have a hard time seeing him putting together a win streak to get back to the title shot, or get back to a title shot. And if Figueiredo wins, we're probably going to see a fourth fight, which could lead to a bit of matchup fatigue between the two. And on top of that, it's holding up the division a bit, especially since flyweight's the most stacked division. Regardless, though, I do think this is going to be a pretty exciting fight. The first two fights were pretty exciting, but without further ado, let's get right into this matchup here. Moreno's going to be the minus 170 favorite and come back on Figueiredo's plus 145. So we'll start with the challenger in Figueiredo. So, I think we've gotten a pretty good understanding of what Figueiredo brings to the table. He's the quintessential marauder. He's got very heavy hands, likes to march opponents down. He likes to pressure them. He loads up big on his shots. He's got very big power. Probably one of the heaviest hitters, or if not the heaviest hitter in the division. If I remember correctly, prior to the Moreno fights, his knockdown rate was on par with Gane, which is pretty absurd for a flyweight, right? You don't see that too often. And the guy, he's absolutely cut up. So I don't think anyone's super surprised there. And on top of that, he's got solid jiu-jitsu as well. But for the most part, Figueiredo does most of his damage on the feet. Overall, Figueiredo, he is getting a little older, but I do think he's still a very dangerous fighter. And on the other side is Brandon Moreno, who is, going to be entering his prime. He's going to be defending his title for the first time. And just overall, Moreno's a very solid fighter, very well-rounded. On the feet, he's got kind of unorthodox striking. He can wrestle a bit. He's, really good in scrambles. But I think what really separates Moreno is the fact that he's got elite cardio and durability. I mean, the guy's chin is cast iron. He was taking Figueiredo's best shots for 5 rounds. And even before that, he was taking some pretty nasty shots from Pantoja as well, who I would consider as one of the heavier hitters in the division also. So, Moreno, very durable, and he has shown he could push a pretty crazy pace for 5 rounds as well. And he's actually quite skilled as well, so it's not like he's just a punching bag in there. And honestly, there's just something discouraging about, your opponent taking all your best shots and still being able to move forward and continue to push just a super aggressive pace. But taking a look at this matchup, right off the bat, I do have to say I think the numbers kind of favor Moreno a bit. I think statistically, when it comes to trilogies, the third fight does favor the fighter who won the most recent fight. I don't know the numbers exactly, but I think historically it does favor the guy who's won the second fight. And on top of that, Moreno is going to be the much younger fighter in this matchup. Figueiredo is getting a little older. The weight cut is I think becoming a bit of an issue for him. He did say it was an issue for him in his most recent fight, and if I'm being honest, Figueiredo didn't look all there in that fight. He definitely looked a little off. And, it's going to be 6 months since his last fight, a year since the first fight. And, since then, he's only gotten a little older. The body's going to be declining a little bit. Whereas with Moreno, he's going to be entering his prime. He's going to be, improving as well. Whereas with, Figueiredo, there's only so much more improvement we're going to see from a 34-year-old flyweight. And, if we want to take it a step further, the first fight was pretty close. I do think that Figueiredo should have won that fight. Of course, he got the point deduction, but the first fight overall was actually pretty close. But the second fight wasn't really close at all. I mean, we saw Moreno get the finish. We saw Moreno get the knockdowns, and we saw Moreno, have a decent amount of success with the grappling. So before we even get into the stylistics and, we just look at the big picture, it definitely does favor Moreno. He's going to be on the upswing. And, he's going to be the much younger, fresher fighter, whereas Figueiredo is likely at the tail end of his prime. If not, he's already a little past his prime. So I do think big picture, we're looking at, a more favorable matchup for Moreno here. But, if we do look at the stylistics, I do think that it's starting to favor Moreno a little more. I think the advantage that Figueiredo had going into these fights, and even in this fight, is the striking. I do think Figueiredo's the much heavier hitter. He's going to be landing the heavier shot still, but we are starting to see him maybe slow down a little bit. The weight cut might be getting to him, but even outside of that, I do think that we've seen Moreno take some of his best shots. So, I think it's kind of unlikely that we see Figueiredo get the knockout here. So I think the best chance for Figueiredo to win this is probably to just do enough damage, land the bigger shots overall, and hopefully look to win a decision this way. But I just don't see that being too likely at this point in both of their careers. I think that Moreno has shown that he can keep it pretty competitive on the feet. And I think the real, X factor in this fight is going to be the grappling for Moreno. We saw that the round that Moreno most clearly won in the first fight was in the fourth round, where he was able to hit a takedown and, really get his grappling going. And then even in the second fight, Moreno was able to get the knockdown on Figueiredo, but where he had the most success was when he was able to take Figueiredo down and eventually find the submission. So I do think that if Moreno really aggressively goes to the wrestling and the grappling this fight, he could have a lot more success as well. So I think he could definitely replicate that from his previous fights. And also by going to the grappling, Moreno is going to be able to mitigate a lot of the striking that comes from Figueiredo, which is really what makes him the most dangerous. And it also will sap at the cardio of Figueiredo, which, I don't think Figueiredo's got terrible cardio, but I do think Moreno's got much better cardio. And if he's able to weaponize that pace a bit, I do think he could potentially find the submission once again. So I'm going to go with Moreno to win here. I like him to win inside the distance, actually. But, I wouldn't be surprised if this went to decision. That said, though, I think it might be kind of contingent on how the weight cut is going for Figueiredo. So we might have to wait for the weigh-ins for that. But, I'm definitely leaning the Moreno side regardless. So the pick for me is Moreno, and I do think he gets it done inside the distance. I'm leaning towards submission, but, I'm not ruling out a knockout either, because he was able to knock Figueiredo down in that second fight. And I do think he could potentially catch him again. So give me Moreno, and give me Moreno inside the distance. And in the main event, we have Ciryl Gane versus Francis Ngannou. And as it stands, Gane is the minus 130 favorite. Comeback on Ngannou is plus 110. So the line is getting steamed quite a bit in Gane's favor. I was able to lock in a bet on Gane a little while ago at near Pick'em. And some people were actually able to get pretty significant plus odds on Gane a few months ago. But regardless, let's dive right into this matchup. So we'll start with the challenger in Gane first, which, I think we all have kind of an idea of his style. Gane is a very high-level kickboxer. He moves really well in there for a heavyweight, moves a lot better than some of the lightweights out there, honestly. The guy's got fantastic footwork, good distance management, shot selection. Is just able to kind of flow in there. It's, very impressive to see. He went through three of the top strikers in the division, three very dangerous guys in there, and honestly just made it look very easy. He coasted past two very dangerous strikers in Lewis and Rosenstrike, and then beat a very high-level, experienced kickboxer in Volkov with relative ease. He didn't take a ton of damage to that fight and was able to more or less just outpoint and outwork a much more seasoned vet in Volkov. But I guess that'll bring me to one of the big concerns that I do have with Gane here. So, he's able to roll through a lot of these high-level guys with relative ease, and I think that speaks to the talent and the skill that he does bring to the table. But it also means he hasn't really faced a ton of adversity in there. He hasn't really been, pushed to the limit. We don't know what he's going to do when he, starts eating bombs from Ngannou, right? So overall, that's just my big concern with him, because for all we know, Gane could be very chinny in there. Like, he could crumple at the first clean shot that Ngannou lands, or, even worse, Gane could potentially be a quitter. Obviously, this is speculation here, but we just haven't really seen that from him. We don't know that, how he's going to respond when, he gets touched by Ngannou. Is he just going to start to shell up and look for a way out? I don't think he will, and I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt, but we'll see what Gane's really made out of when Ngannou starts landing on him. And Ngannou definitely will land on Gane, in my opinion. I think it'd be a little naive to think that Gane's just going to, dance around Ngannou for 5 rounds and just finesse him to a victory. I think that with the way Ngannou fights, he's going to move forward and he's going to create openings to land those bombs. And Ngannou's for sure the heaviest hitter in the division, arguably, in the history of the UFC. So, Gane's going to have to find a way to kind of weather that early storm of Ngannou, because Ngannou's going to be landing on him. Unlike Lewis, unlike Rosenstrike, Ngannou's not the type of fighter to get backed up. He's not the type of fighter to look for counters. Ngannou will move forward, and he will look for those bombs. But of course, the big question with Ngannou is how is he going to look beyond those first 2 rounds? Because he hasn't gotten a knockout past those 2 rounds. He's going to be most dangerous when he's fresh, when he's got the most energy. In that first 2 rounds actually. Obviously, we did see him fade a bit in his first fight with Stipe. He landed some clean ones on Stipe, but Stipe was eventually able to get his wrestling going and really wear on the cardio of Ngannou. And with Gane, it's going to be a little more interesting because Gane, he's shown he could, wrestle and grapple a little bit, but not really. He's shown that he'll attempt some takedowns, but he doesn't really commit to it, doesn't really look to get top control time. Generally Gane's just going to look to strike in there. And I thought that was a big factor in the Stipe fight. Stipe being a pretty solid wrestler, being a solid grappler as well, was able to go to that to really wear on the cardio of Ngannou. Whereas with Gane, he's really going to have to rely on just his striking and his footwork to make Ngannou work. He's not a really prolific, grappler or wrestler or anything. So I think that despite Ngannou's, potential cardio concerns, I'm not sure if Gane is going to be able to really work the cardio of Ngannou like Stipe did, just because, there's not going to be too much wrestling, I don't think, involved. So I think we potentially could see some of the power of Ngannou translate into some of the later rounds, maybe in the third and potentially the fourth. If Ngannou paces himself, he's not just throwing everything into the first 2 rounds. It's kind of hard to say because we haven't really seen it, but I just don't think that Ngannou's going to be, pushed as hard as he was in some of the Stipe fights. And combined with the fact that Gane's not really a quick starter in there, we could see that, if Ngannou paces himself, he could carry some of that power, beyond that second round. But regardless, I do feel this is going to be a pretty tough matchup for Ngannou here. Just because I think Gane's just got much better movement in there, just much better technique as well. Not to say Ngannou doesn't have, good technique. It's just that with how Gane moves in there, he's just much more fluid and much more dynamic. But of course, Ngannou does have that knockout power, which could just end the fight at any moment. However, when it comes to these matchups, where we have superior technique versus superior power, I generally tend to lean towards the guy with the much cleaner technique in there. And that's going to be Gane. But, I'm definitely not counting out Ngannou. Like, the guy's got fuck you power, essentially. He could end the fight at any moment. And, if he does land clean on Gane, I could see him just being able to just either completely knock him out cold or at least just swing rounds with some of the heavier shots. And something that I do think might be a bit of a factor going into this fight is going to be the fact that they have trained with each other. They've kind of felt each other's power a little bit. Obviously, not going 100% or something in practice, but do have gotten those reps in with each other. I think is maybe a little beneficial, I'd say, for the Gane side, because I do feel that when it comes to some of these big power punchers, the mentality I think is a bit of a factor here. And I'm not saying Gane just needs to believe, conceive, and achieve, or that if he goes in there thinking that Ngannou's not going to knock him out, then he's not going to knock him out. What I'm trying to say is that with a lot of these power punchers, guys go in there, they're a little tentative, they're a little tight, a little tense. They're expecting that big bomb to land, and they're kind of just hyper focused on that, as opposed to being kind of just loose and flowy in there and look to just roll with the punches, and not just hyper focus on not getting hit with that big bomb, because eventually you are going to get hit with it. It's, I think, inevitable that we see Ngannou land something big on Gane, but if Gane is able to roll with it a bit, I think he could. It would help him weather the storm a little more, because we saw in both the Stipe fights, Ngannou was landing some heavy shots on Stipe, but, Stipe, he was able to weather it early in the first fight. And even in the second fight, he was able to make it into that second round after taking some pretty serious damage from Ngannou. So I do think that, that might be a little bit of a factor, but, of course, we're getting into pretty, weird territory here with this theory. So I don't want to talk about that too much, but, just taking a look at this matchup, I do think that we're looking at Ngannou, who his most likely win conditions probably going to be in those first 2 rounds. He's going to look to land clean on Gane, look to put him out. Whereas Gane, we're going to see him try to skirt on the outside, look to touch up Ngannou early, try and, make his reads early and then start to pick up as the fight progresses, as Ngannou starts to slow down. And I feel that probably covers a wide array of outcomes. Nothing groundbreaking here. You'll probably hear this a lot throughout fight week as well. Ngannou early, Gane late, probably going to be the motto for this fight. And I actually don't even know if Gane's going to be able to get the late finish, even if Ngannou's slowing down, because Ngannou's actually shown some pretty good durability. He's actually taken quite a bit of damage in that Stipe fight, the first one. And then in the fight against Rosenstrike, it looked like Rosenstrike had landed a nice counter on him as well, and Ngannou was pretty much unfazed by that, just continued to windmill his way into a knockout. And then in the second fight, it looked like Stipe might have stunned Ngannou a little bit, but Ngannou recovered pretty quickly there and was able to land the knockout blow on Stipe. So I do think that Ngannou's got pretty good durability, and Gane's not exactly like a power puncher, so I'm not sure if Gane's going to be able to get the late finish, even against Gane or Ngannou that is slowing down. So the pick for me here is going to be Gane. I think he gets it done via decision. Probably going to be a close-ish one. We start to see him pull away late, but it'll probably be a 48-47 type of decision.